Have you ever asked yourself why there are so many incompetent Imperial officers in the Galactic Empire? It's pretty much a running gag at this point that wherever there is a Grand Moff Tarkin or a Grand Admiral Thrawn, or to a lesser extent an Admiral Piet, there's an Admiral Ozzel, there's an Admiral Mahdi, there's a Commandant Oresco, or rather, there's about 800 of them. So why is it that whenever there is a competent Imperial officer like Grand Admiral Thrawn, there's always about 5 or 6 in the same vicinity that undo everything that the competent Imperial does? And I finally think I figured it out. The vast majority of the Imperial officer corps seems to be cut from the same cloth. They come from well-off families, they've had things handed to them rather than earned like everyone else, so they all carry this elitist persona that oozes, "I'm better than you." Admiral Ozzel came from a wealthy family and went to a bunch of galactic institutions before graduating to become a commissioned officer in the Republic Navy. Can any of that be attributed to his skill as a leader? Well, his superiors didn't seem to think so, because he was regulated to teaching classes for a considerable amount of time due to their lack of trust in his field capabilities, something that we may want to keep in mind when we see his actions in Empire Strikes Back. Maybe those teachers were onto something. Commandant Oresco has no record of hailing from a wealthy family, but he still possessed the same annoying self-importance that most Imperial officers carried with them. He demonstrated on more than one occasion that he masked his fear and cowardice with his cruelty and brutality, which he took out on the cadets that served under him. And this is a pretty telling tendency. We see in Andor where Imperial officers were brutal and merciless against any and all discontent citizens, but when the discontent citizens rose up in anger, the fear was present on their faces. In reality, all of them have no idea what they're doing. Admiral Mahdi, one of the top Imperial officers in the Empire at the time of the Battle of Yavin. He, like Ozzel, came from a wealthy and powerful family, something that no doubt helped him when he sought a career in the Imperial Navy. By known accounts, it appears that Mahdi was a relatively competent field commander. He became one of Palpatine's most decorated naval officers, and it admittedly would take at least some level of competency to get a position as powerful as Chief of the Imperial Navy. So what was his downfall?
The Rebel Alliance is too well equipped. They're more dangerous than you realize.
Dangerous to your Starfleet, Commander, not to this battle station.
Any attack made by the rebels against this station would be a useless gesture, no matter what technical data they've obtained.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes, or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels' hidden fort.
This douchebag has one of the largest egos in the entire Galactic Empire. And it's not like Grand Moff Tarkin or Grand Admiral Thrawn don't have a certain semblance of ego. They're bad guys. Of course they have egos. But there's something about somebody like Mahdi, somebody who goes out of his way to be a hater, somebody who goes out of his way to talk about how much better he is than you. He is the classic monologuing villain. Even though he might be a competent Imperial Admiral, he might have been a competent field commander, his ego overshadowed all of that. And even with the egos of Grand Admiral Thrawn and Grand Moff Tarkin, people who almost deservedly so have insane egos because of how effective they are in the Galactic Empire's apparatus, they never let it overshadow what they're able to do as officers of the Empire. This is why, even though we see admirals like Thrawn, governors like Tarkin, generals like Cassio Tage operating and being very effective in their own right against the Rebel Alliance, it's almost like they take 3 steps forward and 4 steps back because of everyone else in their vicinity, everyone else under them, and in some cases over them, being the most absolutely incompetent people imaginable. Perhaps what's funny about the entire thing is that Palpatine enjoys that kind of stuff. Palpatine loves it when there's dysfunction. He loves it when there's uncertainty within the ranks. He regularly tested Darth Vader to see if he still had it. He regularly demoted and promoted people on a whim based on falling in and out of favor. It very much is right on brand with the Sith way, or more importantly, Palpatine's way, where he always wants everyone to be in lockstep with him. He wants a working empire, but he wants an empire that works for him. It's less about it being a well-oiled machine for his evil duties, and more about him staying on top. and having that control over people, having that control over somebody like Darth Vader or Admiral Thrawn or Grand Moff Tarkin. He loves the discourse. You guys got to remember, this is the same emperor that wanted to burn his entire empire down in the event that he died. He didn't want anybody other than him touching the empire. He had an entire contingency in the event that he died so that the empire that he created destroyed itself and rebuilt it anew so that he could eventually take it over again. He is the epitome of a selfish ruler. He is very much a Sith Lord in that regard. Just simply one of the most evil people to have ever lived. So yeah, he doesn't care if there's a few incompetent admirals throwing wrenches in the plans of ultimate schemes or whatever, because he knows ultimately that he's the one that ends up on top. He's the one that will decide what happens to the Empire's future. He's the one that ultimately decides that whether Darth Vader, he's the one that ultimately decides whether Darth Vader's doing good or not, or whether Grand Moff Tarkin did a satisfactory job. He's the one that decides who makes the next Death Star. He's the one that decides who earns favor, who doesn't. It's all one big game to him, and it's honestly an allegory for fascism. It reminds me a lot of the Nazi officers and the Nazi leadership vying for favor from Adolf Hitler. Simply one of the most dysfunctional governments, thank God, to have ever existed on this planet. And it just goes to show you that the Galactic Empire isn't really about order. I mean, that's not what they're really made out of. They base all of their moves and all of their philosophy off of scaring the populations that they have control over. But the people rise up, as we see in Andor and as we see in most of the original trilogy. All hell breaks loose and nobody knows what to do next. And whoever does know what to do next, it usually involves crushing them even harder. There is no substance. There is no nuance. Even the people that are quote-unquote good at their job, like Grand Moff Tarkin and Grand Admiral Thrawn, still run into the arrogance that ends up being their downfall. Tarkin refused to evacuate the Death Star and he ended up dying. I guarantee they probably could have used him for the ongoing civil war. Grand Admiral Thrawn is not a vainless man. Cassio Tage, another competent general, couldn't get over his feud with Darth Vader. He couldn't get over his mistrust of Vader and the Force, and it ended up costing him, to Palpatine's pleasure. Another general that could have been used for the majority of the war and used very usefully dies before the events of Empire Strikes Back. Officers that haven't had a day's worth of leadership. Some officers that are just not good at the job, but they were born in the right place at the right time, into the right family, rubbed the right elbows, the arrogance that wearing the uniform would display, hiding your cowardice behind brutality and cruelty, inadvertently causing what would end up being the rebellion. And then you take a step back and you realize that all of this is just a game to your boss anyway. So yeah, no wonder there's so much incompetency even in a government, even in a military full of competent generals and admirals. There are just slightly more incompetent ones that don't know what they're doing. And it doesn't help that your boss's boss's boss is sitting back and laughing at all of it happening.